In this episode, it was a great pleasure to have a conversation with Jon Keating, who I've known for many years, but who now enjoys a portfolio career working with private equity and venture capital firms as a chairman, non-exec director and board advisor, helping technology companies accelerate their revenue growth. But during his career, he's held very senior sales leadership positions at numerous organisations, including major corporations, startups, and high growth companies. Jon reveals his tough introduction into sales, but giving him a solid foundation of the craft and his eventual move into sales management. His vast experience shines through as we discuss many aspects of sales management, but also how successful sales managers can chart their future career and the qualities that they might want to develop. We talk about recent changes in selling and the importance of being data driven, but also that some elements of being successful are timeless. And we ended with him quoting Dave Koch, an old boss and mentor, who gave him the 4 secrets of success. Be on time. Say please and thank you. That means treating others with respect. Do what you say you're going to do and do it on time. Enjoy. So, Jon, thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast. Really looking forward to this. So we'll just start with my standard opening question, if you're okay. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you got into leadership, what the journey's been, and maybe why you went into sales leadership?
Yeah. Yeah, Stephen, thank you very much for inviting me on today. We've obviously known each other a long time, so really looking forward to sharing some memories and observations along the way. So I guess the starting point is, of course, I didn't decide to go into sales leadership. I did make a deliberate decision to go into sales. And actually the reason I went into sales was during my student days, as like many people trying to find what job was I going to do in the holidays to make some money. And the first proper job I did was actually selling car advertising space, commission only.
Wow.
Over the phone. And I actually found I quite enjoyed it, and I was quite good at it, and I made quite a lot of money. And then at other times I worked in bars and did all the usual things, and found that I hated the notion of I'd work a 3, 4 or 5 hour shift. I'd get paid £5 an hour and would make £25 at the end of it. And I find I really enjoyed the flexibility and the fact that my earnings were based on me.
Right.
And so from that point, I mainly did sales roles. Of course, because I was only available temporarily, they were typically commission-only sales roles. So one other time, I also sold carpet cleaning door-to-door, commission
Really?
only. I wouldn't say I love all of that, but again, I like the fact that how much I earned was dependent on my own abilities. So that was the start of my sales journey. And when I left university and I didn't really know what to do, of course, the technology sector was starting to evolve at that point. And my choice was either go into the city, which was a lot of my friends from university were going to do, or go into sales, and technology seemed like the obvious sector to go into. And so actually post-university, I found my first job in technology sales.
What, straight from university?
Actually, I did another sort of temporary sales job in between.
Okay.
And then went and joined a company called Memorex Telex.
Okay. Yes.
Who at the time had a great sales training program, which is one of the reasons that I joined Memorex Telex.
Yeah.
And so that's where my kind of journey in sales and journey in technology sales began.
Okay. So, I mean, we'll come on to going into leadership, but so you had that real kind of school of hard knocks, door to door, selling, advertising on the phone. That's, I mean, most people say that's really tough, particularly commission only. But the fact you enjoyed it and made some money, well, do you have any, real basic learnings from that grounding that you did, or?
Well, I think the biggest learning is self-motivation, because nobody else is going to do it for you.
Okay.
And I was motivated, and I could see I could be good at it, and that was sufficient to help me to be successful. But persistence,
Yeah.
clearly, in a job like that, you get
Sure.
a lot of knockbacks before you get the
Yeah.
opportunity to actually sell something.
Yeah.
That was one. But the other part of it, which I've always found was really helpful, is that throughout my career, even as I got into more senior roles, I've always found it enabled me to sit in front of pretty much any sales team and say, I've walked in your shoes.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so when we're talking about the expectations, now I've been there and done your job.
Yeah.
That's the first part. And the second part, of course, is also so look where those roles can take you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I found it incredibly valuable from in that context.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. So you joined Memorex Telex, and they had
Yeah.
a bit. I mean, in those days, there were big sales training programs, and presumably you went through all that good stuff. Um, and then how did you progress? Yeah, most of our listeners and viewers are interested in sales management. So how did you then progress your career and move into management?
Yeah. And one of the lessons, which I think is valuable, is, and one of the reasons I joined Memorex Telex was because they were well known for having a very strong sales training program. And a
Yeah.
lot of the background to it came out of Xerox,
Yeah.
which was also another very strong sales training
Yeah.
school then. And I
Yeah.
thought that was important at that stage of my career.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's still, all these years later, the best sales company that I've worked for
Really?
by some way.
Oh,
It's,
and
and
what?
that's
Yeah.
really stood me in good stead in terms of then as I moved on in my career.
And what you base that on when you say best? In what way?
The level of structure behind it and the
Right.
uniformity and degree to which it was applied
Right.
was really part of the DNA of the organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's many of the lessons that were applicable then are just as applicable now in terms of how you manage salespeople, how you
Right.
give them the support, how do you help them to be successful, how do you assess
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can talk in a bit more detail later on about it, but
Yeah.
there are so many just good lessons in the basics of sales performance, but also then the structure of the program meant that as you developed as a salesperson, you went on to more sophisticated aspects of selling. So you move through into from basic sales training. And our initial sales training included things like where should your tie come down to against your shirt?
I remember that. The point should be on your belt. Yeah.
Top of the belt,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I
What
remember.
shoes do you wear? What suits do you wear? What color shirts do you wear? I
Goodness.
mean,
Yeah.
right from those sort of basics,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then right the way through into things like psychological selling, which was all
Yeah.
about Myers-Briggs and understanding different personality types. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
really was they took you on a journey of sophistication, and it was a real badge of honor when you went on to that sales training program, because you could only go on to it once you'd achieved a certain amount and showed that you had
Yeah. Yeah.
mastered some of the more basic skills. So it was a real hey, I'm going on psychological selling. Isn't that fantastic?
Right. Right. Okay. And it'd be interesting thinking of sales teams today
Yeah.
where, because we talk about growth mindset and all that good stuff,
Yeah.
which is really important.
Yes.
But it's, that quest trying to improve all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
So back to the first question then was, how did I get into sales management? Then actually that gave me a really good grounding. But I didn't go into sales management at Memorex Telex. I actually moved to a company which was MDIS, McDonnell Douglas Information Systems, which I think is now Northgate.
Yeah.
And I moved into one of their divisions. And I spent 2 or 3 years as a territory salesperson. And the reason I got my first opportunity in management was actually for all the wrong reasons, which was the business unit director called me in one day and said, well, you're the most successful salesperson, so we're going to offer you a sales management role on the basis if you can do it for yourself. Hopefully you can help other people to do it.
Right.
And that was actually his rationale, which I think we both agree now isn't the best rationale for promotion.
No, although it's amazing, on some of the other episodes, it is still, it is common. Yeah. hopefully less common these days, but it still applies.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get lucky with yourself, but often it's a disaster in my
Yeah.
view. So
Well, and the reasons for doing it were not the right reasons. It may have been that I was
yeah,
coincidentally the best new business salesperson, I should add.
right,
And then
okay,
I happened to have some other skills, but that wasn't why I got the job.
yeah, amazing. Um, okay, so that's kind of a nice segue to my next standard question, which is, when you're recruiting sales managers today, what are the kind of attributes, or, the characteristics that you look for to say, this is what would make a good first line sales manager?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. I mean, I think leadership and coaching ability
Okay.
is key, and it's transitioning that mindset to actually. I think it's challenging, particularly for high performing salespeople. Is your role changes from
Yeah.
you've moved from this sort of selfish role where all that mattered really was your personal performance and how you maximize it and using
Yeah.
the entire organization to serve your purposes, and actually now your job is to make these other people successful,
Yes.
and your own needs are kind of subordinate to making them successful. and
Yes.
and so being a leader, being a coach, communication skills, I think alongside that, emotional intelligence. So
Okay.
understanding that everybody's different
Yeah. Yeah.
and you need to understand different people, and different people respond to different approaches. Not everybody's the same.
Yes.
But so I think everything around, and then an ability to coach along with that. So ability to talk to people in a way that is relevant to them, and then guide them and help them to be successful. So identifying areas where they're strong, where maybe they've got opportunities for improvement, and then taking them on that journey. So everything around
Yeah.
leadership, coaching. I think in today's world, you need to be data driven. Now, I'm not somebody who
Right.
thinks you should be sat at your desk looking at spreadsheets and CRM reports and things like that, but
Yeah.
there's so much data available
Right.
that to be successful, you have to be able to understand and assimilate and work out what the data is telling you, and then use that to drive what you're doing with the team.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so a couple of things there. Um, yeah, this whole transition from being an individual contributor, as you said, selfish, your whole world is just on you in the deals,
Yeah,
to all of a sudden, oh, actually, I've got other people that I'm responsible for, and my success is dependent on them.
yeah.
That's a that's a big transition. I've spoken with quite a few people. How long did it take you to make that kind of mental transition? Do you remember that or?
Um, Actually, so my biggest challenge when I took over the team. So I at the time I was in one business unit. We had about 12 salespeople, and the
Okay,
sales teams were split traditionally north and south. And so I had the southern team, which was
right.
about half a dozen people,
Okay.
and I was the youngest person in the team.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And a couple of the salespeople I had were significantly older, more experienced than me.
Yeah.
And so the challenge was how do I, as a youngster, how do I work with this completely varied sales team who are probably all looking, thinking, I'm way more experienced than him. Why the hell's he got the job? And
Yeah.
so, anyway, in terms of how long it took me to make the transition, I think I was sort of forced to think about it more because I had to think about how I was going to get credibility
Yeah.
with this diverse team, particularly the older, more experienced salespeople.
Yeah. So how did you do that? How did you go get that credibility?
I think it's something that stayed with me, and I'll give you a couple of examples. But a lot of what I took in management actually came because I'd always played sport to a
Right.
reasonable level,
Yeah. Yeah.
and particularly team sports.
Right.
And I'd always captain sides right the way through my sort of school, university, and then post university. And I think you
Yeah.
learn a lot from being in a team environment,
Yeah. Yeah.
and particularly from being captain in a team environment. And so one of the things I was very conscious of was how do I add value to each of these people?
Yeah.
such that, because that's what will give me credibility.
Yes.
And I learned pretty quickly, because I had to, actually how I was going to add value to each of them. So, for example, with the most experienced one, well, I didn't know the products and solutions better than them. I
Right.
definitely wasn't a better salesperson.
Right.
So, how did I add value? Well, how I added value to them was I made sure I removed all the obstacles out of the way as far as the company support, whether that be approval on pricing or getting resources for something or getting people
Yeah.
involved in a demo, anything like that that I could do so that they could concentrate on selling
Right.
was how I added value to them.
Yeah.
And because I couldn't, whereas with some of the others, I had my sales skills were good enough that I could help them as being a partner looking at a deal and add value from a sales point of view.
Okay. Yeah.
So I worked out, or tried to work out, how I could add value to each of them as different people, because they were at very different stages, how long they've been with the company, how well they knew the market,
Yeah.
how experienced they were as salespeople. And
Yeah.
I think that stayed with me. It's that working out, how do I add value to this person to make
Right.
their job easier so they can sell more.
Yeah. Interesting. Because already, so it seems though, very early in your management career, you latched onto that. We treat different people in different ways,
Yeah.
different motivations. And for me, it's yeah. As a good salesperson, uh, I mean, we treat customers differently. We look at their individual motivations to buy and
Yes.
stuff like that. And it's the same when you move into sales management.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
uh,
And in fact, it's interesting. Like, one conversation much later in my career sticks in mind, and I was speaking to a VP of sales. I'd just taken over a wider responsibility that incorporated that. I won't say too much to give away the person.
okay.
And I was picking up quite a lot of grumblings about the leadership and added value this person was offering. So the
Right.
team didn't want to take that person to customer meetings because they just didn't feel they were adding
Yeah.
value.
Yeah.
And when I spoke to them about it, the conversation I had was, where do you think you add value to your team? And they said, well, I'm a good people manager. And I said, what do
Right.
you mean by people manager? And what they
Yeah.
really meant was they all like me. I
Okay.
always bat on their side,
Yeah.
and I challenged them as to they needed to be doing something that adds value, that makes the
Yes.
salesperson's job easier, and they
Yeah.
couldn't think of anything. And actually, they were right. They didn't have anything because they didn't
Right.
offer anything.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. Yeah.
and so in fact we parted company not long after, because
Yes.
that was one of the problems, was that the sales team were getting no value
Yeah.
from the leader.
Yeah.
And that value can take different forms. It could be because over the years, I know I'm a much more capable, sophisticated sales leader when I'm looking and analyzing deals, and my ability
Yeah.
to add value to a salesperson could be high, even if I don't know the products or solutions in the same way.
Yeah.
So could you. It could be because you have really deep understanding of the market and
Yeah.
the solutions and the products, and maybe the
Yeah.
salesperson doesn't.
Yeah.
So it can be lots of different forms, but you have to be adding value in some way.
Yes. Yes. And that's interesting, because I'm just thinking of, I mean, some people I'm working with right now who are adding, it took them quite a while to work out what that value add was. And
Yeah.
you're right, it's not just being nice, and it's not just having, you know, a VP signature or whatever. It is in lots of different ways. Uh, okay. And then matching that to the
To
situation.
the individual. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Can I come back
Yeah.
on this thing about being data driven, because it's one of the things I struggle with at the moment, because I absolutely get the sentiment. Um, and you said something quite interesting. It's understanding, analyzing. I think you said about the data and what you're going to do with it,
Yeah.
which, because I think a lot of sales managers today are very encouraged to be not just to be informed by the data, but to be almost dictated to by the
Yes.
data.
Yes.
And there's, I mean, do you share my concern there that sometimes it's the data's there to help us for us to interpret, not just to follow it slavishly.
Yeah.
How do you approach that whole thing? Because there's so much data around.
Yeah. And it is balance. And so I think the problem becomes when everything is measured,
Yeah.
and and that's in spite of maybe the quality
Sure.
or the reality. And so what happens if you drive it too hard is the sales force actually they'll make sure the data's in CRM because they get kicked so hard if it's not.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the quality of the data is not very good. It's there just because it has to be. And so
Yes.
that's not helpful. So I've always believed that you capture the data that you can explain to a salesperson why it will help them to do their job more successfully.
Yeah.
And I hate capturing data because management wants data because
Yeah.
you just don't get, or you get conformance if you beat people
Yeah.
hard enough, regularly enough.
Yes.
But the
Yeah.
data doesn't help, and all it does is detract people from doing their jobs.
And maybe gives false signals to the
And
to the
full signal,
business.
yeah. But so
Yeah.
I think if you find that right balance, which is, I've always felt if I could explain to a salesperson why the data capturing it that way would help them do their job, then there
Right.
was a higher chance of them actually capturing it in a legitimate way, and therefore the quality would be usable.
Right.
But I do think that there are, the opportunity we have with data today, it gives you so much more information, real information, rather than
Oh,
just subjective opinion. And
for
if you
sure.
look through, I think of a couple of examples I look at the moment, and so you appear to be meeting the target in terms of volume of leads,
Right.
and that's translating to MQLs, SQLs. That's translating through to discovery calls, but then there's
Yeah.
a big drop off in terms of sales qualified opportunities or
Right.
won
Yeah. Yeah.
deals, lost deals. Then you know where to start looking. Is it quality of leads? Is it because the salespeople aren't very good at a discovery call? And
Yeah.
it guides you to where you need to double click to
Yeah.
determine, okay, what action can we take that's going to improve that lever?
Right. Yes. I love that word guiding because I
Yes.
think again that's where people struggle. Is it do I just follow the data, or is it there just to kind of give me a bit of advice? But guiding is a
Yeah.
nice way
And I
around
think
that.
it's hugely valuable if you use it for that purpose. And then the conversion right the way through the sales process.
Yeah.
By
Yeah.
some basic analysis, looking at historical trends, things like that, you
Yeah.
can actually make a much more educated assessment of where's the problem, where's the area of improvement that we need to focus on.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Um, and the other word I wanted to come back to you on, because we've known each other for a while. You used the word leadership, and I've seen you demonstrate tremendous amounts of leadership. But what does that word mean to you?
Yeah, there's always the eternal one difference between management and leadership. Um,
Well,
so,
yeah,
so I think leadership is more about setting a vision, setting a direction,
yeah,
um, being able to explore the bigger picture, the sense of purpose, and is a way of motivating and energizing people. And I
right,
see the management component as being much more about ensuring that we have KPIs, that KPIs are properly measured, that we use the
yeah, yeah,
data from them.
yeah.
And I think that's a super important part of sales management. So,
Oh,
but
yeah,
just
yeah.
being a manager without direction, without vision, without leadership, I think it doesn't motivate and energize people.
Okay, so it's the motivation. Yeah. Okay. Uh, okay. Interesting. One thing definitely wanted to talk to you about, John, was although we focus on this podcast on helping new first line sales managers, is maybe helping them to think about their whole career and not just how do I get my first job, but as you move into sales management, what are the kind of options then that become available to you? What should you be looking for in your next role? What are the skills that you think you should be
Yeah,
developing?
yeah. Um, so I think about that in two different ways, and I can give you examples of where I didn't do this very well. But I think often, whether it be salespeople moving into sales management or a sales manager looking to move up into next level sales leadership, is
Yeah.
particularly at those lower levels. And I was guilty of this as a first time sales manager, being very, very focused on my number and my quota.
Right.
And I know when it came to annual quota discussions, I was a pain to work with
Right.
because I was so focused on my number, my
Yeah.
team's performance, negotiating the best possible target to allow me to maximize my overachievement and financial
Yeah.
rewards.
Yes.
And I didn't have a big picture view at all. And I
Right.
think what I've always looked for and I learned a good lesson on this, which is one particular company I was working for. There were 5 or 6 effectively first-line sales managers, albeit we had reasonable-sized teams because we had sales and pre-sales, and there were sort of
Right.
half a dozen of us.
Okay.
And the UK managing director was moving on, and within the company, so he was being promoted and was
Yeah.
going to promote somebody into that role.
Right.
I had by far the best performing team, and I also had by far the best team, I'd say team spirit, team morale,
Okay.
and I didn't get the job.
Right.
And the reason I didn't get it, we sat down and talked about it.
Yeah.
He said was because my mindset was too limited. It was too focused on my team, my performance, and not enough on the overall team. And he didn't think I was big picture looking enough. And he gave it to somebody else who he said, let me give you an example. That I'll say to them, can you do 20 million? And they go, that's 10 million more than last year. How am I going to do that? Let me think about it. And then they'll come back with some ideas. I say to you, do 20 minutes, 10 million more. You'll show me 5 spreadsheets to show why it's completely unrealistic. And 13 is a much more realistic number.
Okay.
And then you'll end up with a target of 14 and do 17.
Right.
He'll start with a target of 20 and do 18.
Right.
And he was right.
Yeah.
He was right. But it really stuck with me is that as you're looking for those more senior roles, you've got to behave. I talk about it behaving one level up. So behave in the way that you'd expect someone in that at that level to behave.
Yes.
Not at your parochial level of I've got a region, I'm going to negotiate the best number for my region and then overachieve.
Yeah. But it's a paradox, isn't it? Because I get what you're saying, but particularly I think when you're new in the role, you will focus on your team, get that team spirit, get the performance going. But then, yes, at some stage you need to transition your mindset.
You need to evolve.
As well.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And do you think most sales managers these days do look at it as a kind of a vertical career path that, it's just, can I get my boss's job, in a few years' time, or do you see people doing other things?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. I mean, I think, I guess your initial question was around what are the journeys or paths for people, and I think the opportunity today is far more exciting than it was 20 years ago, because 20 years ago, the path for someone like me was typically heading to be a mere head of something, a mere managing director, a mere general manager, probably working for a reasonably large US company.
Right. Okay.
And the path there was either bigger EMEA operation or really moving to the US and trying to get a first line executive role in the US, which for various reasons I never came the right timing for me.
Yeah.
And therefore you're always kind of one level down because you were the EMEA head working for a US operation. And I think and those roles are still there, and there's still plenty of them, and it's a perfectly valid and exciting path. The other alternative now is that there's been so much more funding into the European technology scene over the last 10, 15 years that there are now lots of European and UK headquartered companies with executive level roles. And of course, the way that the particular role is evolved is into being a chief revenue officer or CRO type role, where you're very much a key member of the leadership executive team, driving and making the decisions that are really going to make the business successful. And I think that's quite a different path, because that can take you into much more varied sizes of companies. And personally, I spent the first half of my career typically with large companies, so multi-billion-dollar revenue companies. And then I spent the second part of my career in the sort of scale-up world, working with companies anywhere between, probably the smallest would have been about 50 people when I joined. And the largest was probably 2,000 or 3,000, so still a reasonable size. But very different types of roles.
And is the role of the sales manager, let's come back to the first line sales manager, or the first or maybe second line, is that different, you think, in those more traditional businesses versus the scale-up businesses?
Yeah, I think it's very different. Um, a um, a colleague or ex-colleague of mine had a great analogy for it, where he talked about when you're in the startup phase, what you need is the SAS. So you need
Okay.
people with the ability to pivot, to adapt to things, to make things up, to be able to respond to things on the
Yeah.
spot.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, when you're in those large, very corporate, successful companies, that what they really want is the police. They want people who
Okay.
do exactly what they're told to do
Yeah.
because they've learned over time that this is what makes people successful. And
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
want as little divergence from that as possible.
Right. Right.
And and I think that's the big thing. That's not to say
Yeah.
either is better,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're just different. And actually the
Yeah.
failure rate in the first one, guess what, is much higher
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
because it goes into all the dangerous situations where actually the target market isn't well defined, the positioning isn't well defined, and you've got to be willing and able to pivot
Yeah. Yeah.
in order to find where the ideal customer profile and spot is.
Yes. And accepting that you may fail through total external forces.
Yes.
I better just point out the SAS is the UK's special forces. Yeah, we've got a lot of listeners and viewers in other countries around the globe, but it's those small units that operate fairly independently and autonomously, and go and do special things.
And what I realised, as I moved into the second part of my career, was that I really enjoyed the challenges and the sense of reward that went with being in those situations where it wasn't all laid down in a playbook, that you
Sure.
had to be able to work things out for yourself and adjust and pivot. That I really
Yeah.
enjoyed and then finding the solutions and then hopefully executing successfully.
Right.
And I personally just found that when I was in those large companies, that essentially you were largely told what to do, and your
Right.
job was to execute to the highest possible standard.
Yes.
And again, that's not to say that's easy at all,
No. No.
but it wasn't as fulfilling and rewarding for me.
Well, I guess certainly once you've been in a role for a few years, you're successful at it. You're starting to push up against the boundaries, and then the freedoms offered by a startup. And I guess most of those startups or scale ups were kind of PE funded. Does that make a difference? Do you think? Because I've noticed quite quite a lot of differences in sales management behavior when it's a PE funded organization
Yeah,
versus
yeah. And in
versus
fact, most of my history, operating executive history, was with VC backed firms.
right.
And interestingly enough, most of my experience since I started, sort of portfolio non-exec, has been with PE-backed firms.
Right.
And I didn't set out that way, but it's just the way, the dynamic that I've come across.
Yeah.
I think the biggest difference is in the VC world. Of course, everybody's chasing hyper growth,
Yeah.
and so the hardest challenge can be for a sales manager in that environment. The first one is, of course, quite often you are blazing a trail, whether it's a successful US company that's just come to Europe.
Yeah.
And you've got to work out, is the US proposition just as valid in Europe? Does it need tinkering with? Or you're
Right.
going to a new country and trying to position your solution in a new country. So
Yeah.
there's a huge amount of, you've got to be brave. And that's brave in lots of different ways. Hiring people, the positions you take, the
Yeah.
targets you take, because you haven't got 10 years analysis to say, well, in DAC last year we did 10 million, the year before that we did 9, the year before that we
Yeah.
did 8, and that was with 4.2 salespeople, and now we got
Yeah.
4.5 salespeople. You've never sold into DAC before. You're hiring a team.
Right.
So what's a reasonable target?
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
So it's part science,
Yeah.
part
Yeah.
art. But there's a lot of risk, and so you've
Yes.
got to be comfortable with that sort of risk. Whereas I think in the PE world, as a sales manager, it is much more about typically by the time the PE investment has happened, the target market is clear, the solution is clear, the why
Right.
they win is clear, and what
Yeah.
you're really looking about is again is strong execution.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay. And it's uh, I mean, I see a lot of salespeople and sales managers joining organizations and not really understanding where the organization is in its journey.
Yes.
what are the expectations of the shareholders or the investors, and then being surprised on some of the different pressures
Yeah.
that they come across. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So uh, if we move our discussion just a little bit
Mm.
away then from uh, the new first line manager,
Yeah.
let's assume most of them, they listen to these podcasts, take your great advice, and become successful. What are the skills that these days you think are the ones that you should be developing? You talked about behaving one level up,
Yeah.
but a bit more specifically, what are the kind of skills that you think successful sales managers should be developing so that they can move in either up or in different directions?
Yeah. Um, yeah, good question. And I think in a question you're obviously, and I've asked it myself in interviews and being asked it is, where do you see the future? Where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years time?
Yeah.
And it can seem a bit like sort of one of those puerile questions, but
Yeah.
actually, I wish I'd thought further ahead in my
Right.
career about where I wanted to be,
Yeah.
because I would have made some different career choices along the way.
Oh, okay.
And
Really?
and the reason I say that is because I think to the point about what skills you need to develop. To some extent, it depends. Do you see yourself as a mere MD for Amazon Web Services with a team of 10,000, probably more than that, 20,000, 50,000 people? Or
Yeah.
do you see yourself as a CRO of a leading European funded SaaS company? And I
Right.
think they're quite different skills that you would want to build on. And so
Yeah.
I think it is important, if you can, to look ahead and say, actually, what is it I really like? What do I want to be doing? What are my aspirations? And
Yeah.
then plan your career. Because I think at times I was too short sighted. And
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. What I mean by that is that I never went. I mean, I worked at 3Com, as you know, because that's where we met, and that at the
Yeah.
time was a $4 or $5 billion company. The UK, which I was managing, was 400 million, so the
Yeah.
decent sized business. But I never worked for one of the traditional industry leaders, a Oracle or a Salesforce
Okay.
or a Seaball or someone like that.
Yeah.
SAP, quite deliberately. I had opportunities to join all of them at some stage.
Yeah.
I met with most of them at least to explore, and then elected not to join. And the reason
Okay.
was, back to that, I didn't really want to be in that big company environment. But actually, I should have done a stint at one of them, because
Yeah.
it it definitely is looked on so favourably when you're going for jobs later in your career, even much more senior jobs, because they like to see the stamp of a company like that perceived to be an industry leader where you could have learned valuable lessons.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
always looked at my next job, not the job 2 jobs after that or 3 jobs after that.
Right. Well, I think looking for your next job is a revelation for most sales managers who are either just desperate to be successful today or bogged down in being successful. So having an eye on this is where I want to go, but as you say, then think 2 or 3 steps ahead, and
Yeah,
presumably. I mean, when I've asked those interview questions, where do you see yourself being? Some people come back with a very detailed,
yeah,
these are the steps I'm going to take to be MD.
yeah,
And I personally get quite nervous when they have that
yes,
packaged in that way.
yeah,
But I also get nervous if they don't have a clue.
yeah, yeah.
I guess it's getting that sense of direction, the kind of place you want to be.
Yes. I
Um,
think I think it does help in making the right decision, and making the right decision does help then build your skill set. And
right.
and then specifically on the skills, so the first one is, I think, if you come up through the sales channel, you you've got to be expert in selling. You've got to
Yes.
understand the different sales models, sales theories, sales principles, and
Yeah.
you've got to be expert in coaching people, guiding them
Yeah.
in adding value in any deal.
Yes.
So there's the skills specific to the job, and then the other skills are those sort of more general management skills. And I think I've improved a lot, but the number of people who are essentially poor managers
Yeah.
because they've never been trained or they find it difficult. What do I mean by poor manager? They're either too hard or too soft.
Okay. Yeah.
And what it means is people either feel bullied, or they feel they're not getting the level of candor and feedback that they need
For
to be
sure.
successful. And
Yeah.
there's a couple of books actually which I've read over the years, which I think really cut to it. One is Fierce Conversations
Okay.
by
Yeah.
Bill
Yeah.
Scott, and the other one is Radical Candor by
Yeah.
Susan Scott. I
Yeah.
think they're both great books in terms of having
Yeah.
direct conversations with people.
Yes.
Not
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
not nasty conversations. They're just business conversations that are very direct, that lead
Yeah.
no ambiguity, but which are designed to help the person
Yeah.
improve.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, being supportive and being challenging and
Yes,
directive. I particularly use Radical Candor,
yes,
or First Conversations is a great book as well.
yeah,
I'll put links in the show notes for
yes.
people so that they can look those
So I
up.
think those, and then the third one is, of course, expanding. How do you expand beyond just being the salesperson? How do you get seen as somebody? Because often the challenge can be maybe you've made up you're now head of sales,
Right.
but really you're managing quota carrying salespeople. When you look at the CRO function, if you're heading in that direction, then you've
Yeah.
got pre-sales, you've got partners, you've got marketing,
Yeah. Yeah.
so you've got business development. So
Yeah.
how do you build up your knowledge? How do you get engaged in those other areas so that you're not just seeing as the sales guy or girl?
Yes. Yeah. And how do you do that whilst at the same time doing your day
Yeah,
job, which is,
yeah,
producing some numbers, keeping the team
yeah. And I
motivated?
think some of it is demonstrating that you're thinking next level up. And of course, the
Yeah.
age
Yeah.
old conflict is between sales and marketing. And
Okay.
marketing always deliver too many crap leads,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sales never bother following up the leads
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
given.
Yeah.
And I think
Uh,
you have to demonstrate you're able to think the next level up and be
yeah.
collaborative with your marketing stakeholders.
Absolutely.
And so it's behaving in that way so that perhaps when then there's a decision, actually you make it a natural decision because you've already demonstrated that you can work closely with and align with those other functional areas.
Yeah. 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 Amazing. John, I've got one big final question,
Yeah.
and we'll take a quick break before that. But just to summarize where we're at so far, if you had to give, two or three pieces of key advice to a new sales manager, what would it be? Because we spoke about a wide range of stuff here.
Yeah. So, I mean, if there was somebody who was just starting into the role,
Yeah.
the three things I would say are, number one, get to know the team as individuals
Right.
and your important stakeholders,
Okay.
because actually they're the people who will help make you successful.
Yes.
When you've got that ask that you need some resource for something, you need some development for this particular project, you need a particular person available to help at short
Yeah.
notice, that's what we will help you get what you
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
And of course, you need to know your people, because you need to know what motivates them, how are you going to get the best from them, and you need to know them as people and as individuals.
Right.
So that would be one. The second one would be, um, I, I ultimately you're successful or not by how you deliver against the number. So
Right.
very quickly understand the pipeline and the forecast,
Yeah.
and represent it the appropriate way, because
Okay.
you'll pretty quickly get judged in terms of first forecast, did you make it or not?
Yes.
And if you start to not make your forecasts, then you pretty quickly run into problems as a sales manager.
Yeah, you do. I mean, in my experience, you get that little honeymoon period, but it comes to a close very abruptly at one state. One day you suddenly
Yeah,
realize, oh, right now, I'm in it for real. So yeah,
yeah.
get a grip
And it
of
happens
all that. 'Cause,
quickly. If
well, a lot more quickly than anybody ever promises. Your
Yes,
boss always says you've got 3, 6 months. Well, yeah, but 3 or 4 weeks into it.
yeah. And I had a good bit of advice sort of early on in my career, which was the most important thing is to make the forecast, which
Right.
shows that you understand the business
Yeah.
and you're in
Yeah.
control of the business.
Yes.
If the forecast isn't your target, then that's a separate issue.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
understand why there's a gap and explain what your plan is to address the gap.
Yes.
And too many sales managers, inexperienced and experienced, make the mistake of forecasting to target because they think that's what's expected. And then you don't make the forecast or the target.
Yeah.
And then pretty quickly, next level up starts to say, well, you don't know your business.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you, I mean, just coming back on that, I totally agree. A lot of managers in general, sales managers in general, particularly new ones, get huge pressure from their boss to forecast, at or close to target.
Yeah.
How do you react to that?
I think the only way to do it is you have to have a plan for the gap. And that may be the in-quarter gap, or it could be a pipeline problem that will take slightly longer to fix.
Yeah. Okay.
And in my experience, it doesn't mean you get away from it. But so the gap in the quarter could be, look, here's my forecast. It's 25% below target. Actually, what we're going to do is we've got these deals that we know have a high certainty. And then we've identified these 6 other deals that could close, but there's a question mark on timing. So what I've actually done is, I'm personally going to get involved in each 6 of those deals.
Right.
What we've got a SWAT team that's going to look at those 6 deals to do everything we can in order to improve the conversion in the quarter. So, because in my experience, what leadership want or next level leadership want to see is, what's the plan? Don't just come to me and say, you're not going to make the number, but they'll hate you even more if you say you're going to make it and then you don't.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if you're going to get fired, at least get fired for being able to forecast and not make the number. Don't get fired for not understanding how to forecast.
Yeah, I always come back to the phrase, fight battles early, and it's better to have a battle with your boss early around why you're not going to make forecasts. Have a plan in place rather than leave it to the end of the quarter or the year, and then you really
because you're trying to demonstrate that actually you're in control. Now at that point, the control may have a gap, but you're still in control of trying to address the gap.
Yeah.
And then the third,
you had a third point.
I had the third one is, I would always do depending on timing of year when you move into the role, but a sort of 30-90 end of year plan. So what am I going to achieve in my first 30 days? What am I going to achieve in my first 90 days?
Yeah.
What am I going to achieve by the end of the year? And what does success look like?
Yeah.
And I'd make sure that was bought into by my manager, and we were both clear on the priorities and what I was trying to do.
And is that just for your benefit, or is it managing expectations with your boss? Or
I think it's both. It's definitely primarily done to help me, because it also helps you determine what's a priority versus what isn't.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things that you need to write it down.
Yeah.
And then you need to hold yourself accountable, or it depends. You may be reviewing it with your boss. You may be reviewing it with the team. I mean, it varies, but you're holding yourself accountable for delivering against it, because you know that those are the steps that are going to make you successful, both short term and long term. Well,
I totally agree with that. Yeah, the planning is one of my things, but holding yourself accountable. And John, we're going to take a quick break, because brilliant so far. When we get back, I'm going to ask you about your biggest mistake and what you learned from it, if you're okay with that.
Yes. I'll give it some thought.
Bonus question.
So, John, some brilliant stuff coming out so far. What's normally really useful is just to try and learn from everybody else's mistakes. Are you happy to share what's been your biggest mistake as a manager, and kind of what you learned from it?
Yes, actually, the good thing by the time you get to my age is you've got a rich library of mistakes to choose from. And actually, it's one of the ways you learn, of course, is making mistakes. And then next time you face a situation, you've got some added tools to use.
Yes.
I touched on one earlier on, which I think in my career, I didn't look far enough ahead sometimes when I made career decisions.
Yeah.
Not to say they were necessarily bad decisions, but they didn't move me towards my goal in the way that they might have done if I look further ahead. I tend to just focus on the next job. So that's one. Another one would be, I think at times throughout my career, and I got better at it, but I think it maybe not quickly enough or early enough is giving people too much time.
Oh, okay. In what respect?
It is where you're working with people. I think you're always focused on trying to make them successful.
Yeah.
But it's actually in different guises, different functional areas, letting a situation go on too long before taking action.
Right.
And there's an old saying about you never regret moving too fast, only too late.
Right.
And I think almost every time when I've been in a situation where I thought, actually, this person's not going to make it.
Right.
But then I worked with them for longer. I tried to make it work. I inevitably ended up back where it started. And I wasted time in between. And it probably wasn't good for the person either, because if they weren't a fit, then it probably wasn't going to work. And so I would definitely, if I was in a sales management role now, I would make earlier decisions, quicker decisions on those people who were going to make it.
Yeah. And is that, I mean, all of us, I mean, if we're in sales, we probably have a positive, optimistic outlook, and we probably have an ego as well. And for me, because I've been in that situation, reflecting on it, and I've seen it as a challenge.
Yeah.
Certainly, I should be able to help this person.
Yes.
My coaching skills are good enough.
Yeah.
But if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be.
Yeah. I think that's right. And the other thing is, what goes with that is, I think the single biggest factor on whether somebody's going to make it or not, as long as they've got some basic mindset, is how coachable are they? And
right. Yeah.
The ones who won't make it are the ones who, for whatever reason, aren't performing, but actually know it all. It's never their fault. It's always some third party, the company, the price, the vendor. They're always getting surprises, but it's never their fault.
Yeah.
And those are the people it's just not worth spending your time on, because if they're not coachable, they won't change.
Yeah.
And we work out pretty quickly how coachable people are.
Yes. Although, I mean, there are some tools to help, but you have to use your judgment in some of those things.
So I think I was at two mistakes, and I mean, I've made tons of mistakes in business. I think the other one, the other reason I think sometimes we're slow to respond is because, we all do the math. So I've got 6 salespeople, 12 salespeople, 24, 48. My target's X million. If I lose 2 salespeople, by the time I hire somebody else, take time to ramp, then I'll be 2 heads down, 20 heads down, just depends on the size of the team. So we keep people because of the maths.
Yes. And you think a warm body at least is going to do something.
Exactly. And I think over the years, I've come to the conclusion that actually you're better off having fewer heads, but those heads are better because they'll do a better job with the leads anyway.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So those are kind of 2, which definitely I've learned over a long period of time. Hopefully I'm a lot better at than I once was.
Yeah. And what about your biggest triumph? What are you most proud of as a manager?
Actually, the biggest triumph, I mean, I've always loved winning big deals against tier 1 competition, whatever it happened to be in that particular space, when everything was against you, and you won a 7-8 figure deal against that competition when you really had no right to win, purely through successful expert salesmanship, largely.
Right. Okay.
And so that's always given me a buzz, and I can think of lots of examples in every company where that happened. But probably more than that is, I guess the biggest reward for me has been that latter part of my career is working for a number of scale ups and taking them from a few million to tens of millions to hundreds of millions in revenue, and dealing with all the challenges that went with it, and overcoming them. And they were different in every company, and all of them there were times where you thought, I don't think we're going to make it.
Right.
And yet somehow we did, and all of those
Yeah.
businesses went on to become extremely valuable and
Yeah.
by most standards successful. And I think that just gives you a huge sense of reward
Yeah.
and satisfaction. And then
Yeah.
alongside that is then, I think sometimes it's sad, but it's only when you leave a company that you find out how valued you were
Okay. Yeah.
by the people, because they actually come out with all those tributes. Not that it would have changed your mind as to leaving or not, because it's not necessarily the reason, but
Yeah.
nobody ever tells you that when you're working for the company. They only tell you when you're leaving, and then it's very humbling
Yeah.
to realise that you had such an impact on so many people.
Yeah. And again, people are busy. We're heads down on the task.
Yeah.
Particularly as a manager, you don't get the feedback, the positive feedback, and nor should you. We should be beyond that as a leader.
And it's also that you expect your manager to give you that feedback, and maybe they do, but it's just one person. It's people who you work with, or in other functions. They may not even work for you, who tell you how much you impacted them.
Excellent. Jon, this has been a real delight catching up, hearing some real words of wisdom there. Any final remarks that you'd have for the listeners, the viewers, particularly first line managers?
Yeah, actually, there's one which one of the most inspirational leaders I worked for was a guy called Dave Koch.
Okay.
At Netergy, which was my first startup.
Okay.
And he had many words of wisdom, and I've used these particular ones to pretty much anybody who's worked for me, on the basis that I thought about them and thought, actually, every person I value highly their performance, you can attribute these 4 things to. And Dave used to say, there's 4 things, and if you do them well, then you'll be successful. And one was be on time.
Okay.
Second one was say please and thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Third one was do what you say you're going to do. And the fourth one was do it when you say you're going to do it. And I found out, as I thought about it over the years, that literally every high performer I know could be relied on for those 4 things. And I think as a manager, whatever level you are, if your boss gets those 4 things out of you, then they know they can rely on you.
Yeah.
And that's an important part of being successful. So I've always kind of had that in my mind, and I've shared it with many people along the way.
Right. That is brilliant. We'll make sure that's in the show notes as well. But doing some of those simple, they seem simple things.
Yeah.
But they are not, everybody does them.
Yeah. And the little things about them, what sits behind them, of course, the say please and thank you is about treating everybody with courtesy and respect, from the receptionist when you walk in the building to the CEO.
Yes.
And the same would be on time. Value the other person, don't disrespect them. And obviously, to do what you say you're going to do. You need to be relied on.
Yeah.
So
brilliant. All right, Jon, it's been a pleasure. Thanks ever so much. And onwards and upwards.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. Really enjoyed the chat, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
If you're an aspiring, new, developing, or an experienced sales manager in complex business to business, or you know of someone who is, you may want to go to www.realsalesmanager, that's realsalesmanager, all one word, .com, to learn about our unique blend of training and coaching to help aspiring sales managers to decide if it's right for them and how to go about getting a job, to help new sales managers get as effective as possible, as quickly as possible, and to help developing and experienced sales managers with a personalised program to improve some of their specific skills.